I'd like to do an introduction of the next speaker. Neil Greenberg is a Detroit-based transit professional. He's worked for, Neil, have you actually ridden on 90 different transit systems? Am I right about that?
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, 90?
96.
All right, 96 different. All right, here we go. He's fond of innovating routing, efficient scheduling, and sleek graphic design. He's produced Freshwater Railway, which is now Freshwater Transit, as a way to communicate, very important, communication of transit concepts. He has created and is a program administrator for Airbus, a transit connection between U of M Ann Arbor and Detroit Metro Airport. So let's welcome Neil.
Chris? All right, no, believe me, I don't need two. I scarcely need one. All right, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. All right, so this is a bit of a two-tier introduction. Chris introduced me, so I can introduce Denny Zane. And Denny is representing Los Angeles, the concrete jungle. All right, LA, excellent. So Denny is something of a powerhouse as far as transit advocacy in Los Angeles is concerned. Denny founded Move LA in 2007, and Move LA is a really cool coalition of business, of labor, of government, of a lot of different stakeholders in the transit system. And listen closely to a lot of what Denny has to say, because there is a great many parallels between Los Angeles and Detroit. Denny's had a lot of experience with ballot measures, messaging, and making sure that you can get to that magic number to pass the ballot, which means a little something more in California than even it does in Michigan. So we're going to hear a lot of Denny's stories from the trenches. He's going to show us a video. He's going to talk a little bit, and then after that, we're going to get some use out of those stools, and Denny and I are going to do kind of a facilitated Q&A, if you will. I have some questions for Denny that kind of have our needs in Metro Detroit in mind, and then he'll be able to give us kind of the LA spin on those things. And listen up, because there's a lot of good stuff to learn from the City of Angels. And here's our resident angel.
So you've heard of birds of a feather who gather together. I guess we are angels of a wing. You know, LA has new mojo, we like to say. In fact, we celebrate our new mojo regularly. In fact, on June 12th, we are going to have the second annual LA's Got New Mojo party, and we will at that point honor and celebrate the tenure of Mayor Villaraigosa. Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, and I think the tenure of the good mayor will be an extraordinary moment in Los Angeles history. Now, he will have had the misfortune to have had to lead during the worst recession in our nation's history, the worst recession since the Great Depression. And everybody who has had to work on local government anywhere during that time knows it's very difficult to succeed at much of anything, really, except trying to hold things together when the bottom of your economy is falling out. Well, LA's new mojo occurred on the very cusp of that recession. In fact, the election of November 2008 occurred barely 6 weeks after our economy nationally went into free fall. You remember that moment? We all saw it on television, didn't we? There was President Bush and to-be President Barack Obama evidently conferring about what the hell should we do now. And all of us are looking around the various rooms at one another, catching each other's eyes and wondering, is it over? Are we in free fall? That was the very moment on which the voters of Los Angeles went to the ballot to vote on a Measure R. And I'm going to play something for you here that I think helps you to understand the spirit that emerged from that victory and how it has created what I call the new mojo in Los Angeles County, and maybe give to you a sense of possibility, perhaps even fun, in the journey that you're about to undertake.
LA's got lines.
LA's got lines.
New light rail line.
Light rail line.
New subway lines.
Subway line.
Those lines, those lines, those new lines. Subway, light rail, new bus lines. Let's connect those lines, those new lines. Let's hear the lay of the lines. The green line's connected to the blue line. The blue line's connected to the red line. The red line's connected to the gold line. Now hear the lay of the lines. The orange line's connected to the red line. The silver line's connected to the red line. The silver line's connected to the gold line. The purple line's connected to the gold line. Expo's connected to the blue line. Expo's connected to the red line. Now hear the lay of the lines. Soon Expo's gonna meet Crenshaw. The green line's gonna meet Crenshaw. The subway to the ocean's gonna get us all in motion, and the LAX extension of the green line's worth a mention. From the valley to the beach, once above it is in reach, and they put it all together with the regional connector. Ride the rainbow on Metro. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Metro down to Union Station. Let's go, let's go, let's all go. Metro and hear the lay of the lines. LA's got lines, those new lines. Subway, light rail, new bus lines. Come and see those lines, those new lines. Come see the lay of the lines.
My thanks to Gabriel Morgan and John Curry for their artistry and their spirit in putting this wonderful piece together. LA's got lines. It's got new lines. It's time to ride the rainbow. Well, we have parallel histories, don't we? I mean, Los Angeles region was noted for its widespread, extensive rail transit system built around the turn of the century and unbuilt, if you will, torn up, famously made famous in Who Killed Roger Rabbit in the 50s. Now, isn't that a parallel here? Wasn't there a rail system, a trolley system in Detroit that was torn up roughly the same time frame? 1956. Well, I think in 1958 is the moment we think of as the culmination of our denouement, you might say, and when the car culture. Now, there's a real parallel between our communities, I would say. Weren't we creating the market for what you were creating as a product? We were in some sense the colonies buying up the manufactured product of the more advanced civilization in the manufacturing leadership of Michigan in that period. You were giving us the basis of our future culture. For this, I think we probably should thank you. And maybe listen, I am a fan of the automobile. It has an important place in our culture when it's electric or hybrid electric, and we don't have to deal with emissions, et cetera, and we have real choices in our communities. This is not about one system really versus another. This is about a multimodal system, many choices. That's the kind of community we need to build for because that's the kind of efficiency, location efficiency, and economic efficiency and environmental quality. That's what will get us there. We need to have a multimodal system that gives people choices and makes it easy to move about to their jobs and their places of fun and shopping and their community. So I want to share with you a bit of our story of transformation, because it didn't really start with Mayor Villaraigosa. It certainly did not start with Move LA. It had started back in the 1980s, actually, when a charismatic supervisor named Kenny Hahn managed to convince the leadership of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors that there was a need for a rail system in Los Angeles County once again. And he led a charge that resulted in the creation of the Blue Line light rail line from Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, to Long Beach. Now, that line now today carries about 93,000 passengers a day. It is the busiest light rail system, I think, in America. But they didn't really stop there. They started building out a green line and even working on a red line, a subway, which they initially thought might go down Wilshire. But this was all happening in a kind of incremental way. One line beget another line, beget another line. And there wasn't really a kind of comprehensive plan that put it together. In fact, it was kind of the politics of the moment. But it gives you, I think, a very important lesson, and is that there is no substitute for leadership in getting these kinds of missions accomplished. And certainly elected leadership is one of the crucial forms of leadership that communities need. So there's a challenge that needs to be laid down to those who are elected leadership. It's time to lead. These things do not happen of their own. They happen because people lead and people organize, and they put together the energy and the coalitions necessary to overcome the resistance. And the resistance is typically political and financial. And political frequently has cultural roots. But that's what is required. Leadership is required. So Kenny Hahn put together a system that resulted in about 75 to 80 miles of rail transit. Now that first began, the Blue Line opened in 1990. Now that was just yesterday. I mean, I don't know, I was in college in the 60s. That seems like just yesterday. Of course, it was a good time. It's amazing I remember it. But 1990 is just yesterday. We had the Blue Line come out. There was a ballot measure in 1980, half-cent sales tax for transportation at that time. There was a growing bus system, but it was rather decrepit, not very well regarded, and certainly not the pride of the community. And in 1980, the voters, now remember Prop 13, all heard of Prop 13 in California? Well, Prop 13 was the start of that very conservative anti-tax wave that really began in California in 1978. It did a couple things. It slashed property taxes in the state, but it also made, along with some subsequent measures, made it necessary for every source of money to be voter approved and to require 2/3 vote. Hey, do you all have that? God, imagine you had that. Then you'd really think you were stuck, wouldn't you? We got to get 2/3 vote? Well, that had happened in 1978, but the court rulings about what it really meant didn't occur until the 90s. So in 1980, despite Prop 13, and in 1990, despite Prop 13, in Los Angeles County, a half-cent sales tax was approved, 1980 with 50.1% of the vote. And in 1990, another half-cent sales tax with 50.6% of the vote. Now, those are majorities. In those days, we needed majorities. In 2008, we needed 2/3 because of Prop 13 and court rulings subsequently. Can we imagine what Los Angeles would be like now if we did not have the opportunity in 1980 and 1990 to approve those sales taxes? They are the source of funding for the transit system such as it existed to that point. 2,000 some plus buses, and then the beginning of the Blue Line, the Green Line, and the Red Line, and subsequently a Gold Line. So there had been some incremental improvement, and it really had just started in 1990. I tell you that because while the story of Measure R is a compelling story of really a moment of transformation, moments of transformation like that begin incrementally, and they culminate into a victory, a transformational victory like occurred in 2008. So as you think about your course forward, you need to think about, we're not going to try to replicate necessarily LA's moment of transformation. We're going to build upon moments of success and victory, and we are going to head toward our moment of transformation. And by God, if LA can do it with 2/3 vote, so can Detroit. Maybe we will be, in a sense, with our inspiration, repaying the opportunity you created for us to have a culture that had its virtues, even if it had its deficiencies. So I want to now then flash forward to 2007 and talk about what was happening in Los Angeles County at that moment. We had a young mayor elected, Antonio Villaraigosa, on a platform of renewing our transit system. And Antonio was an amiable, charismatic figure, a very progressive politician with big vision. And one of his visions were that LA County really needed to restore the transit system that it once had in the 50s and 40s and 30s. And on that platform, he was successfully elected to be mayor of Los Angeles. But there was a big hurdle. There had been some problems in the creation of the earlier subway, and federal legislation then ensued that blocked the availability of federal money for subways. And so in order to get his iconic Wilshire subway going, he had to first convince Congress to let up on that restriction, and he did. He went back to Washington, convinced Congressman Waxman to introduce the legislation to give LA once again the opportunity to use federal money for a subway. And at that moment in time when that happened, you began to see a flower beginning to grow, because the community began to have a sense that, well, maybe there's something here that could happen. Maybe it's possible that we could recreate momentum for such a system. And people began to organize and to convene, and in particular, we did. And so this is once again an example of where leadership matters. Not only elected leadership, but leadership in the community. I mean, somebody has to call the meeting. I mean, and it was a meeting just like this. Not many more people than are here today that gathered together to say, well, Antonio is willing. We have a mayor who's willing. Doesn't always have to be a mayor, but it certainly helps if the mayor is willing. But the mayor's not king. The mayor needs a parade. The mayor needs constituencies to get together. That's our job. So we called a meeting. We called 35 organizations. Not all, but most of the significant leadership in the labor movement, many of the significant leadership in the business community, and many of the significant leadership in the environmental community in Los Angeles. Now, I think these people maybe had never been in a room together. They certainly had never been in each other's offices together. I mean, first meeting was the LA County Federation of Labor, and the leadership of the Chamber of Commerce walks in and goes, hey, I've never been here. I mean, how amazing is that to me? So we had called a meeting, and it was one of the first meetings that ever gathered these constituencies together in the same room. And when we called them, 35 organizations were invited and 34 showed up. You have no idea what magic you can unfold if you call the right meeting. We discussed at that point how we were at a crossroads, how we had a mayor who was willing, how our traffic had really gotten worrisome, and how it was that we really needed a very significant new source of revenue if we were going to make a difference here. And everybody agreed. And you know why everybody agreed? Because everybody cares about prosperity. They have that much in common. They may have differences about how much regulation there should be. They may have differences about what's, a good environmental strategy, or what's the right land use policy, or what have you. But they all care about prosperity. And when you can put it to them that starkly about how collaborated we can create prosperity, people will coalesce, and they did. And at that moment in time, we began to discuss how it was in California. The real money was in the hands of the voters. And we need to talk billions of dollars here, not just a few million. Billions of dollars. What is it that could give us billions of dollars that might possibly win 2/3 of the vote of the voters of Los Angeles County? Well, it turned out a little polling gave us the answer. 69% of the voters in that poll said they would support a sales tax. Now, the Metro folks did not believe our poll. They thought, well, Move LA is this, enviro-liberal gathering. They probably got those enviro-liberal pollsters. And so Metro did its own poll, really literally 3 weeks later, and they got 71%. And Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, as hopeful as he always is, said, well, you all got those liberal, pollsters. They always give you good results. I want my skeptical East Coast pollsters. And so the skeptical East Coast pollsters came out and they got 73%. Oh my God. It's time to go, LA. But we need to go to the state legislature because we needed authorization. Now, isn't that something you have a challenge with as well? Virtually every community needs to get some level of authorization from their state legislature. And you know what makes a difference there? Leadership. Assemblymember Mike Fuhrer went back to Sacramento. He introduced the bill, and he held to that bill. He wouldn't open it up for amendment because everybody wants to put their project on the Christmas tree, right? And if everybody does it, you just get a lousy idea. So he resisted. He said, Metro is the planning body. We are going to enable them to go to the voters with their program, not our program. And it held out literally to the last minute when the Senate, state Senate could legally approve. And finally, the two holdout senators voted yes. It was a remarkable moment. Then LA Metro had to put it on the ballot, but the deadline for putting it on the ballot was August 8th. And then you had to go to the county to get the county to agree to consolidate it with other measures. And at the very last minute, like August 7th, Metro agrees to put it on the ballot. And then it goes to the Board of Supervisors, and they vote 3-2 not to consolidate it. First time in history anybody had ever voted not to consolidate a local measure with the county ballot measures. And 2 weeks went by, and we're all going, oh my God, it's going to stop here after all this? And one of the supervisors changed their vote, and we're going to the ballot. We literally had approval for consolidation. If they hadn't agreed, it would have been on the ballot, but it would never have been able to be lawfully permitted. How embarrassing would that have been? And there we were starting our campaign then, just 2 months before the election, knowing that this was the election when Barack Obama would win and bring out the vote, large enough to make a difference, large enough maybe to give us the 2/3 vote that we needed. And what happened in September, as I mentioned before? The economy went off a cliff. And I went, oh my God. Is this really possible after all this? The economy goes off a cliff? No way we're going to win this now. We looked at each other, and it was like that song Jeff Bridges sings in the film Crazy Hearts. Remember this song? It goes something like, even falling feels like flying for a little while. We didn't know if we were falling or flying. But on November 8th, the voters voted 67.8% in favor of a half-cent sales tax that would generate a $40 billion revenue stream over 30 years. 70% of that money will go to transit, 25% to operating. And let me tell you, if you build it and you do not provide for operating money, it'll sit there nicely and embarrass you all. So make sure that when you are building, you are providing for operating money. 25% of this was operating money. 12 major new rail lines, including a Wilshire subway, including the Exposition Light Rail, under construction now in Santa Monica, from Culver City to Santa Monica, which will connect the beach to downtown Los Angeles. And everybody is going, wow, LA's got new mojo. And so on June 12th, when we have our celebration, we will be not only celebrating the extraordinary leadership of our good mayor, Antonio, who raised all the money, who went, did everything that a mayor could do to make this happen. They used to say that the water project in Los Angeles that William Mulholland was responsible for, that environmental travesty, that foundation for our industrial civilization. They used to say that was an extraordinary achievement. This is an extraordinary achievement, and this was democratic. This one we voted on. So we will have, I think, a lot to be proud of, and they say it'll generate about 500,000 jobs. How cool is that, in a down economy like this? That doesn't even include all the induced economic efficiencies which will make LA more competitive in the world economy. I mean, already downtown Los Angeles is repopulating. It's amazing. There are people walking their dogs in downtown Los Angeles. I mean, you don't walk your dog where you work. You walk your dog where you live. There are people living again in downtown Los Angeles. And over the next couple decades, as this grows, downtown Los Angeles will once again, after being depopulated, frankly, by the loss of the movie theaters on Broadway and the automobile, the loss of the transit system, it will be repopulated again. LA's got new mojo. It will become, if you think about Los Angeles, it's got lots of extraordinary advantages already. It's in the middle of the world economy. I mean, there's the Asian economy, there's the Latin American, the Brazilian economy going crazy. There's the European, Atlantic, and the Midwest economies. And LA is kind of at the crossroads. Now, what kind of economic advantages of that is that? Imagine if you also had clean air in one of the finest transportation systems. I mean, hell, we already got the best weather. LA's got new mojo. And we're looking forward to sharing our success, our strategies, and our inspiration to everybody who thought it just couldn't be done. It would never be done in the automobile capital of the known universe. 70% of that money that 70% of the voters voted for is for transit investments. And we had a second measure, Measure J, in 2012. It didn't pass. It only got 66.1%. I mean, now there's a movement. There was legislation discussed in committee last week to lower the voter threshold for transportation cities and counties to 55%. If that happens, California is back. If we can once again have the authority to actually invest in ourselves, California will be back. And we're a big part of the national economy. So when we're back, we're all back. LA's got new mojo, on to Detroit.
All right, we're not done with you yet, Denny. Tell us more. Thank you, sir.
What's wrong with Marco Rubio? I mean, he just a little glass of water.
All right, so, is this,
We'll see.
No? Yes, no? Okay. All right, so, excellent, especially on the heels of what Jason Jordan told us from Center for Transportation Excellence, a lot of ballot successes going on. And in the way of encouragement, just seeing that, yes, it is possible for transit ballots to pass. In fact, they pass at rates of 79, 80%. That's a great place to start.
As a matter of fact, allow me to note that in San Bernardino County, Orange County, and Riverside County. Now, these are not the Democratic bastions of California, right? They had half-cent sales tax extensions that passed with 80%. We are not in an era, people think we're in an era of anti-tax voter sentiment. No. Remember that 50% back in 1980, that 50.6% in 1990? That was voter resistance. 67%, 66%, 70% in San Bernardino, Orange County, 80% in San Bernardino County. The voters are telling us we're ready for investment.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing a couple things in your stories that I think are really, really informative for us. Triumph, which is great because you obviously triumphed in a lot of ways. I'm also feeling some pain. This was a fight. And that's an important thing for us to realize is that we're not at the end of this, we're at the beginning of this. Yes, we got a lot of the legislative challenges out of the way, but from here on out, it's implementation, and it's a ground game. So can you tell us a little more about some of the specific tools that your group used, that other parts of the coalitions used, to move the support from the big, from the 34 stakeholders in the room, to move that message to the voters? You said, the biggest nugget of wisdom I've heard in a while, the real money is in the hands of the voters. I wrote that down. Denny Zane, 2013, he said it. I'm sure Brandy can back me up on that. I hope she can. That's a really important message. One of the things we're great at in Detroit, especially in recent years, is getting people, high-profile people, to agree loosely to a concept. And we do have kind of a loose agreement that transit is a worthwhile use of our energy. But how do we move that message to the voters? And how did you do it in LA?
Well, it starts with coalition building, and coalition building starts with grassroots organizing. But it doesn't, we started it as a grassroots group of a half a dozen folks working together, trying to figure it out. But we knew that in order to go beyond where we were, having the great email list or having the whatever, that would certainly be useful down the road, but at some point you have to convene constituencies. The people who have credibility among their community, who can gather together, look at the program and the plan, say yes, no, maybe, or what have you, and find agreement. So we started recognizing that we needed the leadership of the business community and the labor community and the environmental community together in one room. Apparently, little did we know, they hadn't ever really done that before. And I was wondering at that time why nobody had called that meeting. And I think all I can say is that this particular need was especially appropriate for that kind of convening because it was countywide, because it would be voter-wide, and because it was fundamental to everybody's prosperity. And the leadership of the labor movement and the business community were responsive. I mean, I think everybody agreed, yes, we need a solution. And they had their doubts about whether the political structures, the Metro Board, for example, could on its own do it. I think they believed correctly that if we were to sort of work out a going forward together, an agreement like sign on the dotted line that we're going to work together for this, that would have a significant effect upon the decision-making process at the agency and their ability to come to a countywide plan. And indeed it did.
Okay. Within each of those communities, obviously the business community, that's not just a handful of people, that's hundreds of thousands of business owners and all their employees and all their stakeholders. From the time you had that meeting, where you had the big stakeholders and the big representatives of the stakeholder groups together, how long did it take from that first meeting until you could tap the average person at an average business on the shoulder and say, hey, have you heard about transit? What do you think about it?
Well, if you mean have you heard about Measure R, I have to say that things operated largely on a kind of coalition grass tops level really until a couple months before the election. Now, I'm not saying that's the ideal way, but what had happened for us is that we had come to the realization of what could succeed in February of 2008, realizing that it needed to be on the ballot in November of 2008 if it had a chance. So there were lots of steps, I think, if we'd have had a longer trajectory that we would have undertaken in addition. But what we needed is to move the process. And I suppose when the process has a deadline, it moves more readily than it otherwise might. So perhaps it was a good fortune that we were kind of late getting started because everybody was disciplined by the process, by the deadlines that were implied. I think the average voter began to really fully appreciate that something was happening when Metro put it on the ballot. And there was newspapers going, hey, sales tax going to the ballot, media stories, sales tax going to the ballot, transportation sales tax. Do you want a transit system? What do you think, voter on the street? And all that started happening in this very media saturated community that we live in. Now, by the way, even the big metropolises, what you really learn is that they're all really small towns. A lot of, they're a series of small towns and neighborhoods, each of which has its own kind of leadership structure, et cetera. And if you learn how to coalesce into discussion that framework, then you can get to yes much more quickly. And it does take persistence, it does take intelligence, it does take argument and sleepless nights and all of that. But like I said, everybody really knows that this is about prosperity. And in the end, if you appear credible, if the coalition you're building looks credible, the leadership will follow.
what were some of the specific negative messages and or misconceptions that you had to overcome to get to that 67%? I'm still just baffled at what a big number that is.
Right. Well, I think the biggest challenge ultimately was kind of regional rivalries over whose priority was first in line. You know, we knew fundamentally that there was no shot of getting 2/3 if you didn't do at least 60% everywhere, right? There'd be places you'd be stronger, places where you'd be. So you had to have a plan that was very specific, that could go to the voters, where every community in the county could see that they were benefiting specifically from this. Here was their project. The San Gabriel Valley was getting the gold line. The San Fernando Valley was getting the orange line, et cetera. You had to have that kind of plan. And you know, that's thoughtful leadership, is when you know that a long-range plan needs to be put in place so everybody can see that they're going to share in the benefit at some point in time.
Absolutely. So drill down even a little more specifically, because, you know, in terms of each community understanding what it's going to get from a transit system. In this area, we don't have a lot of immediate close-by references for what effective transit looks like. So obviously you had a lot of ground to cover in LA, just like we have a lot of ground to cover in Detroit, and you weren't able to build 85 miles of rail in 1 year. So, you know, how were you able to kind of throw certain communities a bone and say, look, we can't have the Expo line in Culver City until 2011, but we can give you a, you know, rapid bus on Venice Boulevard in the meantime? You know, give us some specifics.
Well, there are two answers, I think, to that. In Los Angeles County, frankly, in Southern California, over the last 2 decades, there's developed something called sub-regional councils of government. It's a wonky-sounding term that really means cities near each other get together and talk about what they need. So there's the West Side Cities Council of Government. There's the San Fernando Valley. In each of those sub-regional communities provide the basis of a negotiation in their community about what their priority might be if there was to be, and that was occurring long before this ballot measure was actually a gleam in my eye or anybody's eye. There was this institutional framework developing for planning purposes. And so when you had to go out and negotiate the measure, most of these communities already had a pretty good idea what they thought was the most important thing transportation-wise in that sub-region. And the serious negotiation would become, you know, how much money does each get and what's the schedule in which it is rolled out, right? Who's first? Right. Who's at the end of the 30-year period and who's at the beginning? Right. That's a tough call. Now, there's an opportunity for you all here emerging in Washington. I know it's tough to think things emerge in Washington, but there is really interesting stuff emerging in Washington directly on point, and let me tell you about it. It's something called, Mayor Villaraigosa called it the America Fast Forward program. Really a simple idea. It was the idea that, well, if we got a revenue stream to build these projects, maybe we can borrow money somewhere and accelerate the development, right? Because if you look at what carries us out 30 years, it's really just the cash flow. If you had all the money up front, you could build it all. And that the real time frame for design and planning and environmental review and community outreach and construction and set was about a decade. So we came up with the idea of the 30-10 plan. Take the 30-year plan, build it in 10 years. How are you going to do that? We're going to borrow money. Everybody does that. Every agency does that, right? To borrow, you bond against your revenue stream. But the key question is, could we get a low enough interest? Could we get it scaled up so that it could cover all of these lines? Not a loan on one line, but a loan on 12 lines, like a line of credit. So that idea was taken to the federal government, and at first it was like, oh, we've never done anything like that. Maybe luckily, our Senator Boxer, up for re-election, was chairman of the right committee, and she picked up on this idea and made it happen. So in the last transportation bill, one of the key components of that program, of what became the America Fast Forward program, was created. It's called the TIFIA loan program. It's direct government loans at low interest for major projects. You take $1, let's say take $1 billion of federal money, and you can give one community a $1 billion grant. Take that same $1 billion, you can give 10 communities a $1 billion low-interest loan. Now, what's going to drive more communities to get their act together? Well, I think 10 communities are going to be stimulated rather than one. Now, I like grants, don't get me wrong here. But if the federal government becomes a smart lender, not just a big spender, we can have it both ways. Pending right now is the second half of that program. It's called the America Fast Forward Bond Program, and I urge you all to think about this and support this, because these two programs together as bookends can create for any community access to low-interest financing. What does that mean? It means when you bring that proposal to the voters and or to those communities, and they're all fighting over whether it's a 30-year program and whether they're first in line or last in line or what the hell, how much easier is that discussion going to be if it's 10 years instead of 30? You know? I mean, the old after Measure R, you know, we're sitting around at the press conference celebrating our victory, and people are looking at me going, so you're going to live long enough to see it? And I go, well, let's see, I'm 60, it'll be 90, I don't know. You know, but if it had been 10 years, everybody thinks they're going to be around 10 years now. You know, it really begins to feel very real to all the voters. And that's really the magic of this idea of America Fast Forward. It's not really just that a grant or loans, but it's the idea that you can create an accelerated program opportunity for virtually every community that has a revenue stream. It doesn't have to be a voter-approved revenue stream either. It can be, you know, as long as it is within the view of the parameters of the program, secure enough to justify the low-interest financing, it can accelerate your program. And in doing so, it can rationalize your politics. If we would have had that program in place on election day in Los Angeles, we'd have gotten 75%, not 67%, because every community would see that trainer coming.
So this is complex stuff you're talking about here. Hope you're all taking notes. I know I'm mentally taking notes. Now I know how to get $1 billion from the federal government. Thank you, Denny. You know, what Denny's telling us right now, and a lot of what we've heard about the importance of regional cooperation and funding and various federal loan programs, that doesn't necessarily play to the public. Those sorts of programs are obviously the backbone of getting your transit system up and running, but those aren't necessarily the messages that move votes. How did you take something that's so complex like this? What were the kind of specific, quick, portable, snappy messages that you were able to use to kind of condense all this stuff? You know, you can't stop someone on Pico Boulevard and say, want to talk about $1 billion 1030 federal low-interest loans. So, you know, how or I don't know, maybe you can. But, you know, how did you distill this so voters felt, yes, this is something I want to vote yes on?
Well, there are three big things that people in Los Angeles all care about that are related. We had a long history of air pollution that we had made dramatic improvements on. But that momentum, I think, is something you can build upon. It's a sense of success, but more needs to be done.
Sure.
But the third, of course, is jobs in the economy. I mean, the people know that a transportation system is about prosperity. If you were starting an economy from scratch, right, like China did, right? If you're starting an economy from scratch, what do? Transportation systems are among, if not the first, thing you must do. If you're going to modernize and make an existing industrialized urban economy successful, that transportation efficiency is fundamental. And everybody has a sense of that. You know, maybe not a learned sense, but they don't need much convincing to be able to show that that a transportation investments really helps. Now, will they think it's worth it for them in particular? That's a key question. But when you have, you know, three big wins, you're going to fight congestion, you're going to improve air quality, and you're going to turn around the economy. Well, that's a compelling message. And you distill those into, you know, clever TV in LA, you distill it into TV and radio. And that was done well and effectively, and people obviously bought it. Now, behind the scenes, there's the mayor running around raising the money. I guess he had to raise about $4 million for that campaign. You know who gave that money? It's about a third labor, a third business, and a third civic. When I say civic, a lot of those are retired business, the Eli Broads of the world, people who care about the museum. And oh, by the way, the subway stop is going to be right by the museum. The museum associates put $900,000 into this campaign because they knew that their real mission wasn't art, it was access to art. Otherwise, it's just a private collection.
Wow, indeed. And to think that you could literally get on front of you can get on the bus in front of the museum right now. I mean, it's pretty sweet.
Well, it won't be long before you'll be able to get on the subway in front of the museum. And by the way, when you're done with that museum, you can pop on that subway and you can go downtown Los Angeles and watch the people walk their dogs. Well, no, there's a lot more going on there. It's more fun than that.
So you hit on an important distinction in the way Measure R was put together, somewhat unique in that here, I'm going to try and engage the audience. I'm going to try to engage the audience a little bit. There's two huge halves of transportation funding, and I'll give you the first. Capital to build the stuff, and what's the other half? Operating. Fantastic. Educated crowd. Love it. So talk to us a little more about the importance of, the capital is the ribbon cutting. It's when the politicians can get together and pat each other on the back, and that's fine. That's a big part of it. But at the end of the day, it's the operating that keeps it going. How were you able to kind of communicate that in the whole campaign? Was that a hard pitch to make, or especially with so many different operators and funding sources and local and countywide, how are you able to kind of streamline that for the average voter?
Well, capital is a much easier political sell than operating money, in part because it also creates very visible, concrete manifestations, and people can very easily envision a product that lasts for for 50, 100 years, et cetera. Operating is more difficult to achieve. And so I think the important thing for advocates to do is to marry them. The operating money is what makes the capital money worth creating. Right? Absent the operating money, the capital is like, just going to watch the world go by. So you need to, I think, marry the two and embed the operating money as part of your strategy for the system. People may be voting in their heart for the capital, but they're going to bring the operating along. The other thing I would say is, for example, in the state legislature, when there is opportunity for money, and there's starting to be again a little, emphasizing the need for that money to be available for operating. Now, it's difficult there too, because operating is like a continuing need. Capital with any given project, they can at least imagine that it's built, right? Even though it needs to be maintained. So you need to take the message that the capital is really not very useful unless you got the operating. So if the legislature is going to have a revenue stream, they should be thinking about your pressure, your advocacy should be for the operating side, because the voters are much more likely to solve your capital problem on its own than the operating problem.
Cool. When we did Dave Woodward's kind of Q&A icebreaker thing, we talked about misconceptions and barriers and things that people feel are kind of impeding us. Why aren't we moving? All right, there's talk, but we're not getting anywhere just yet. Kind of are, but we're not there. We heard a lot of talk about culture and a lot of talk about people not understanding their neighbors, not understanding what transit does, where it goes. Me personally, in my experience in LA, I think your transit operators have done a very good job kind of making transit part of the daily culture of being an Angelino. Even go back to the days, go back to the early 80s when the transit system was called RTD in Los Angeles County. People said, well, that stands for rough, tough, and dirty. And that very much was the reputation for transit, was RTD, rough, tough, and dirty. I don't know what RTA can be repurposed to stand for, but let's hope something more positive than that. But if you look at the way the transit system in LA looks today, emphasis on that word looks, because that's important. It was this whole cultural kind of retraining where you could say, gee, I live in an upper income community, or I live in a community that I might choose to live in, and I'm okay to ride the bus or ride the subway with people who might live in a different neighborhood. It took a big cultural retraining, because LA, like Detroit, is a very diverse city. So tell us more about some of the cultural triumphs and the tools that the transit operators themselves have used to make transit a real product that people don't just vote for, but use.
Well, I think I want to acknowledge that it is true that the bus system, as it operated on Election Day, November 2008, was a bus system we could be proud of, and that was manifestly significant for the voters, to give them the kind of confidence in the institution that might execute this long-range plan, no question about it. But it had gotten there through a lot of sort of storm and drang. There had been, back when the agency was first planning its rail system, there was a real battle in the community over whether the rail system was simply intended to serve, the middle-class communities at the expense of the bus system, which served the working poor and the neighborhoods and communities of color. And that was a real battle. And it was a battle where it was easy to imagine that proposition to be true because we had no demonstration to the contrary. And some communities, Manhattan, for example, serves, the subway line in Manhattan's got a pretty middle-class ridership. So that effort, led by a group called the Bus Riders Union, resisted the idea of a rail program, imagining it to be at the expense of the bus program. And what it did is for about 10 or 15 years, because of a lawsuit and a settlement, it was forcing the agency to put its money into its bus system. Now, I profoundly disagree with the premise of the Bus Riders Union. And I think it's demonstrated ably that overwhelmingly all the users of the transit system are now working class and predominantly communities of color. So there is no real distinction between the bus and the rail. But at that time in the moment, that reinvestment in the bus system created a credibility, I think, a visible success in the community upon which advocates for the rail system, for the new rail system, could build. There was confidence in the community. And I think the fact that we put 25% of the money into operating was testimony, and 20%, most of that was for the bus system. Well, that was testimony that rail advocates were not going to leave the bus system without its resources and cannibalize the bus system for the rail system. On the contrary, we were making sure there were resources for both. I think that was a critical and smart decision. It united, I think, the communities. What we found in our votes, by the way, is that working class communities overwhelmingly supported these measures, like 75% yes. The city of Los Angeles was 72% yes. The city of Los Angeles. The county, 67. The places where we had the greatest trouble were affluent, mostly white, suburban communities. South Bay, the Torrances and Redondo Beaches, and then up in the what's called the West San Fernando Valley, Calabasas and Agoura Hills and places like that. I don't know if you even know those names, but that was the breakdown of the vote. And so I think the working community of Los Angeles County saw this clearly and came out to vote. And that's one of the reasons why having our measures on presidential election days is a very important thing, because the working class votes heavily in those elections where it might not vote in other elections nearly so heavily.
Cool. Denny, thank you. I think we have to wind this down, unfortunately. We can go on because there's so much to learn from LA. Yes, Chris, what's up?
I'm scheduled, we have time for 10 minutes. Maybe people want to ask questions.
If we have questions, let's go for it.
Okay.
But we'll be a little tight for the work groups, so that's why we.
What do you think? Anybody?
If you have a question, we'll get the mic.
Speak up.
Question. 25% was the number for operations. Have you found that to be a good number as far as maintaining and operating the system?
Well, we're not.
Yes, the question was 25% of the funding generated by Measure R was earmarked for operations. The question is, was 25% found to be the right number? Too much, too little, just right?
I don't think we know yet. the answer to that. We always assume that we need more operating money, that's the limitation. You know, what happens when you don't have enough is you don't have as robust a service, right? You have 2 trains and 2 rail cars instead of 3 rail cars. You got half-hour headways instead of 15-minute headways. That's what happens when you don't have, you can build it, you just can't operate it as robustly. So how much is needed for what level of service we learn. Transit is a subsidized operation. You know, even the best systems, you know, 30% maybe of their fare box or of their operating costs comes from fares. So at least 70, sometimes 75% of the operating money must come from other sources. My friends at the Bus Riders Union, I would say to them, all right, you want to add 500 buses. Every bus you add, you must subsidize. We must have a new revenue stream for that bus. You want 500 buses? You're going to have a new revenue stream. Where are you going to get the money? We got to go, the only money, real money, is in the hands of the voters.
He says it again.
What's the strategy? You know, and I think one of the things that the rail system, in addition to the bus system, does is it broadens the political base of the electorate that might support it. And you really need that if you're going to have to get 2/3. So we don't know whether that's the magic formula. We do know that we need 70% or 75% of the operating cost to be subsidized. And so we anticipate that we will do a future measure in 2016 and adjust to try to, and we might have to increase it in order to meet the anticipated need.
And just a little annotation. I myself, for whatever it's worth, I've phased out my use of the word subsidy. And I encourage you all to do the same. Maybe say, I like to say community investment. It's a community investment we make. So just a little BS. That you
I'm
all
appropriately
take
chastised.
Oh, no. I mean, yes. All right,
Corrected.
so let's take one more. I'm sorry, let's take one more question here. This gentleman.
And I see lots of hands now.
Yeah, Denny, you said rail broadens the political base. Could you expand on that? I think that's an important issue here in Detroit area.
Well, the thing about a rail line is that because it's a highly visible thing, right, and it's got highly visible stations, it broadens the base of people who perceive themselves as beneficiaries. Bus lines, because they're everywhere, right? They go everywhere. I mean, if you look at a map of a bus system, it's everywhere, which in some ways means it's not anywhere. It doesn't have community identities in quite the same way that a rail station does. And when a rail station can create can have a community identity, it can mobilize support within a half mile or so around that. So you get lots of perceived upsides to a set of voters who otherwise might not vote for the measure.
All right, thank you.
And by the way, that organizing principle, that rail station principle, is really a key part of the economic development magic that a rail system uniquely brings that a bus system cannot do, because it concentrates activity in certain areas, and that creates a job dynamic and a real estate dynamic. It has its problems, there are challenges there, but creates opportunity, and that's, I think, one of the things that really, I think, helps to build voter support as an economic development driver.
All right, any others? We have room of time for 2 more, yes?
My question is, does both, like rail and the buses have one bus fare?
Yes, the fares are all the same, and the access and the monthly passes and the same are common through Metro. Now, in LA County, there are also a number of municipal bus systems in addition to the countywide bus systems. For example, Santa Monica, where I live, there's the Big Blue Bus. Culver City has a bus, Montebello has a bus, Long Beach has a bus system. And that is in addition to what Metro does. But the rail system is exclusively the countywide Metro. Those municipal operators have their own fare policies, but Metro is unified bus and rail on the part that it operates.
Denny just hit on another important point that I like to call out. There's some conventional wisdom in Southeast Michigan that, oh, this is the only metropolitan area that doesn't have one transit system. When in fact in Los Angeles County alone, there's 40 to 50 different operators. So Metro across the county, and then, you know, as Denny said, if you go to the city of Santa Monica and you're just riding from one end of town to the other, you're going to ride a Santa Monica bus.
Each of the municipal operators have service that goes into the downtown of Los Angeles, et cetera. It's more extensive than that.
Right.
It's not just in their city.
Right. All right, yes, sir. Let me come on up to you.
I'm sorry if this is just a lack of paying attention, but I didn't quite follow the economics of this. You said that 70% of the operating costs need to be subsidized, that 30 cents, that the fares only pay for 30% of the operating cost. Are you including in the operating cost the amortization of the initial capital expense, or is that entire initial capital expense also require a subsidy above and beyond what's collected in the fare box?
The amortization of the financing for the capital is in the capital budget, not in the operating budget. So it's and most of the operating budget is people, right? It's bus operators and maintenance workforce and so on. So it's maintenance and operations is, I think, what you would normally think of as maintenance and operations, and that's part of the capital.
We have time for, we have a couple down here from some of the folks with the authority.
Okay.
And, ma'am?
All right.
I'm curious, did you, in your publicity to gain support for this, did you ever compare what it would cost for me to drive my car and park as compared to riding on a bus line and not having to pay that parking fee?
Well, that sort of comparison is part of an ongoing dialogue in many communities, in our community as well. It wasn't specific to this campaign, but having information that demonstrated that you could save a lot of money using transit for your personal use. And I think C&T from Chicago Neighborhood Center for Neighborhood Technology, developed a very interesting and compelling resource where they combine housing affordability and transportation affordability and map it. And they've mapped, I think, every community in the region, in this country, including yours. And that was, I think, a very useful indicator of an economic opportunity, how much it really would lower the cost of living to have this opportunity as well as your car.
There's a proposal in the legislature that would allow communities within Southeast Michigan to opt out of the Regional Transit Authority. And I wondered if what the law says in LA with your regional authority, are communities able to opt out of it?
You need to opt out of, for example, paying the sales tax?
That's right.
No, there's no provision that provides for that. But we have been thinking about a regional sales tax, which would include 5 counties, that in order to win acceptance of that idea, we might have to allow a county to opt out or require that counties opt in, which would mean then, Los Angeles County might have a shared investment program with San Bernardino County and or Riverside County, but Orange County decides not to participate. They wouldn't get the benefits, but they wouldn't have the tax either.
You can't opt out. What we're concerned about is being able to opt out of the system. You don't pay into it, therefore people can't stop. You can't have stops along the system. Right now, there are many communities that opt out of our current system, our current bus system. And we're concerned that if this happens with the RTA, we won't have a coherent, consistent.
I think that's a legitimate concern. I think when you're talking by county level, you're talking about large areas that are contiguous. If you had a very spotted, speckles of area that are opting out, I think that would create a real operational and planning problem.
Not only
not
would
to
it,
mention
it
a
does.
political problem.
Yes. All right. We got Uno Mas.
Hi, Denny. Okay, I was wondering if in Los Angeles, the regional authority there owns any type of land that generates funds for the authority and for the transportation in the region, because here at some of our meetings, a lot of our meetings, there's been a lot of discussion about the state fairgrounds and the lands there where the railway runs through there that could potentially generate funds for the transportation in this region. But I don't know if that's an area that we would want to get into. Is that something that you all do in LA? Thank you.
Yes, I mean, the Metro does own real estate, and it gets developed. They have acquired real estate in the past mostly for, direct transit-related purposes, like, for example, staging for a construction project, or they have to buy real estate around a station area, and they need to purchase more of the real estate to accommodate their activity. And then, once the construction is done, it's surplus property, and it's an opportunity for development. And in general, Metro, I think, the revenue from that becomes part of the operating budget. But it also creates, the development opportunity is an opportunity to build the community base around the station area. So how you develop it is very important. And I think the new model of mixed use, higher density, including housing as well as commercial uses, for example, is a crucial part of that kind of success, because you're especially if you include affordable housing, which we like to describe as high propensity transit user housing, because that really does make a difference, both from an equity point of view and from a ridership point of view.
Denny, awesome. Dripping with mojo.
I see this guy is like, one more question over there.
I think, Chris, what do you say? One more, or we got to call it?
I tell you what, Denny's around, so let's grab him. He's
All right.
going to be here. And if it is missed, we'll circle back to make sure all questions are answered.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Thank you all.
I just have a couple. Thanks, Denny.